4,337 photos with the X2D II, to be precise. So here's a quick look at some of my favourites. So I've been testing the new Hasselblad X2D II for a few weeks now. I've shot largely in Edinburgh, but also in Paris and at a rather exciting horse race event. So in this video I wanted to go through a few of my favourite photos and give a bit of an insight into capturing those images and broadly what I think about the camera. I will say right at the top of the video though that this is not a review of the camera because I don't review products on this channel. But given that I have spent so much time with the camera and taken so many photos, I thought it would be useful to see some example images from it and hear a little bit about how I found it in use. So one of my first favourite shots is this one, and it's in black and white. And straight off the bat, it kind of feels a little bit weird doing photos in black and white with this thing because Hasselblad makes such a big fuss about its natural colour science and how great its tones look straight out of camera. And to be fair to it, they do. But I do always edit my photos anyway to give it my own look, so having strictly natural tones isn't necessarily the biggest priority for me, and certainly it isn't when I'm converting to black and white. And actually I found that the raw files from this camera are really great starting points for black and white photos. I have done quite a few black and white photos in the weeks that I've had this camera, all edited in Lightroom, from this guy who looks a little bit Clint Eastwoody, and this guy squinting through a window, through to some of these pigeons, a few more street shots, and some from my Paris trip. Then back onto Edinburgh's Royal Mile during the Fringe with I think this one of this guy giving me a fist bump being my favourite. Whether it's just the massive resolution or the 16 stops of dynamic range, I don't know, but for whatever reason, I really like how well these images convert to black and white. And that isn't always the case. I do find some cameras don't look quite as good in black and white as I expected them to. But slightly frustratingly, it doesn't actually have any black and white color profile built into the camera. So instead you just shoot in colour and have to just imagine what your photos are going to look like when you then convert them to black and white later. When I shoot with my Leica, with my Canon, with my Sony, I can put the camera into a monochrome profile so that I can actually see what those black and white photos are going to look like before I take them. Even though I still shoot in RAW and so I'm editing a colour file anyway, it just allows you to see your shot in advance, which does really help. And I think maybe it's just because Hasselblad takes itself a little bit too seriously to offer the sort of filmic profiles that you might get from a Fujifilm camera, but I do think if you added that, it would help these cameras appeal a bit more broadly. Anyway, so I took it to Paris and I spent a few hours wandering around with the camera looking for some street-style images. And honestly, I didn't get a lot of shots that I was particularly pleased with, but in all honesty, that was largely down to me failing as a photographer than any kind of comment about the camera. I had a bit more luck on one of my photo walks with my Leica, the results of which I've published already in a different video, but there are a few shots from the Hasselblad that I took in Paris that I do quite like. This artist doing a sketch was quite cool, these people on the bench, and this person on the steps. I've used a slow shutter speed here to blur the motion of the people moving around the subject while keeping them nice and sharp. And it's actually one of my favourite street photography techniques to really isolate a subject like this. It's a technique that would often require either a tripod or a very steady hand, particularly if you're using shutter speeds of a second or more. But actually, the Hasselblad X2D II has got image stabilization up to, I think, about 10 stops. And so I found I was easily able to do longer shutter speeds of half a second, even a second, or sometimes a little bit more, and still get sharp results just by holding the camera in my hands. I actually did do quite a few examples using longer shutter speeds to blur the motion. My tip for doing these kinds of photos is also to use burst mode, basically firing away and hopefully increasing the chances that at least one of your images will be nice and sharp. Because particularly on this camera, there is 100 megapixels of resolution, so when you zoom in on those details, any amount of blur is going to be noticeable. I shot most of the images that you're seeing here with Hasselblad's new 35 to 100mm lens, which is basically Hasselblad's equivalent to a standard 24-70 zoom. And even at the longest zoom end, I still find I was able to get sharp images when using slow shutter speeds. It's a great all-round lens, but it's also massive. But the rest of the time I was shooting at much faster shutter speeds, especially when capturing these guys feeding seagulls in the park or the guy feeding his pigeons. I actually hung around here to get a few shots, and I'm quite pleased with them. And obviously I needed a fast shutter speed to freeze the horse in motion between these two figures. I actually shot a few portraits at Musselburgh horse races. This one that is just an out-and-out portrait of this dude in the hat, as well as a variety of others that were either a bit more candid or more like environmental portraits. It was a good day, and if you want to see more from it, I'll leave a link to the full video below. Oh, and I also shot these guys doing a very serious performance on the Royal Mile. I think it was actually about Britain's train network. And if you ever wonder why I enjoy spending so much time on the Royal Mile taking photos, this is basically why. You just never know what you're going to see. I actually got a few other photos around the Royal Mile as well, including this guy with his piano, which I'm actually really pleased with, and this guy with his tattoo ticket sign, who stood right out to me for probably obvious reasons. So what is it that I like about the camera then? Well, there's no question, the files are gorgeous. They're packed with detail and the dynamic range is huge, so pulling back highlights and lifting shadows is absolutely no problem here. And that's no surprise because it has got an enormous medium format sensor stuffed inside. And the fact that a sensor that size is also stabilized is kind of wild. But that said, I honestly can't say that I've seen such a significant upgrade in usable image quality from what I can get from my 60 megapixel Leica Q3-43. And I think that's maybe because the Q3's lens is so sharp, it's so high quality, that it delivers really crisp looking images. So even though it may not have the same resolution, its shots just have that really pin sharp detail that you would expect from a higher quality sensor. But honestly, this is mostly anecdotal information just based on my brief tests and looking at some of the files in Lightroom. This isn't a scientific analysis of the image files, it's just my gut instinct. And yeah, I do love that stabilization, and I love the 1 terabyte of built-in storage. Or well, I sometimes love it. It is great having all of that space on board, but I also love being able to leave my camera in my bag and just take out the memory card and bring that to my computer, whereas when this is built-in storage, I have to bring the entire camera out, plonk it on my desk, and plug it in. It's a pretty minor problem, to be quite honest, and it does still accept CF Express cards, so I can use those if I want to. What did annoy me though was the eye sensor for automatically recognizing when you're holding it up to your eye for it to automatically switch to the viewfinder. Basically, I found that it simply didn't recognize when I was holding it up to my face. So it didn't switch from the LCD display to the viewfinder, unless I really moved it around and pushed it into my face. And usually by that point, whatever moment I was trying to capture was gone. So I actually found that I kept on having to switch manually by going into the settings, and even that I found a little bit frustrating because you can apply so many settings to the quick function buttons, but not switching between the two view types, which really would have solved my problem. And while I think the autofocus has been sped up from the previous model, it's still a little bit slower than you'd expect to get from a full frame or APS-C mirrorless camera. It's also not quite as accurate as I hope it to be, so I did actually miss focus on a few shots, which again is a little bit of a shame. So I still think these cameras are generally best for slightly slower, more methodical work like landscape photography. Like when I took it up Edinburgh's Calton Hill one evening to shoot a sunset that never really happened, and so I instead came back down when the light faded and did some long exposure street scenes instead. Which, to be fair, I actually do quite like, especially in the very panoramic wide X-Pan crop mode. I do love a lot of the photos that I've taken with the X2D II, and while I certainly was sad to pack it up back into its box and send it off back to Hasselblad, I don't think, even if I had the money, this is a camera that I would buy. Increasingly with my Leica Q3, I found the joy of having a much more compact setup that allows me to carry it everywhere and always have it ready to shoot. And the X2D II, particularly with that zoom lens on, is big and it is heavy, and it is not a camera I would want to have around my neck all day. And sure, my Q3 isn't an interchangeable lens camera, but if I want that, I'll go back to using my Canon R5, and I've never really found that the resolution or the dynamic range in that camera is in any way lacking. Oh, and about the X2D II's new HDR capture. Well, to be honest, I didn't really make that much use of it. Sometimes I had it on, sometimes I didn't. Thing is, I don't have HDR displays, and most of my work is either published on the web, published on YouTube, or published on Instagram, or sometimes in print, none of which right now really benefits from HDR. And HDR displays and HDR workflows aren't really that widespread yet, so really, it just didn't really feel like a feature that I needed. Maybe in a few years when HDR shooting becomes a little bit more ubiquitous, then certainly for high-end commercial pros, those sorts of tools will probably become a bit more important, but I think for everyday photographers, it's just not necessary. Especially when the dynamic range of the raw files of this camera is so great that you don't really need it to be extended even further. So the Hasselblad that I still want to own the most is that little boxy 907X that I used quite a while last year. It's small, it's easy to carry, it's actually fun to use, and so it offers me something that these other cameras don't. I don't need another SLR style camera body like the X2D. That's why I didn't buy a Leica SL3, I bought my Q3. The 907X though was a dream, and it's certainly the camera that I would want to look towards if I had anything like the amount of money it would need for me to actually buy one. I said at the time that it's a camera that actually allows me to slow down and be a bit more thoughtful and creative in my photography, and I still think that about it. But if you are interested in the X2D II, then you should definitely check out some other reviews that actually go into some of the details. Battery life, connectivity, build quality, all of that stuff. Here, I really just wanted to kind of give a bit of an overview of how I found it to use and show you a whole bunch of example photos, many of which I actually am really pleased with. It's definitely an amazing camera, and it's certainly the sort of thing that if I were doing much more high-end projects, I'd probably want to rent for that. But I hope you've enjoyed seeing these examples and hearing a few little thoughts about the camera. If you have enjoyed the video, do please give it a like, and of course consider subscribing to my channel if you don't already, and I will see you next time.